To all the people who know Dead by Daylight, I'm sure you know that the newest chapter at the time for this game is Dungeons & Dragons. I'm super excited for this, but I feel like I did some videos that involved both of these at the same time. Oh yeah, I did. I think it's a good time to make another one. This one will be different since there are actually multiple of these quote-unquote characters. Let me give you a quick rundown of how these videos go. First, I present a character, talk about their backstory a little bit, and then go over the homebrew stat block I made for this character. Got it? Cool. So I'll now present the killer from Dead by Daylight I will be making in Dungeons & Dragons.
Have you seen this man?
Oh, it's the maniac!
Yep, it's the Knight. Let's not forget that he is not alone. I'll go more into that later on in the video. Grab some dice and grab some notes. Let's get right into it. Now keep in mind that some abilities won't act the same way the game the character is from. Other than that, here is the Knight, otherwise known as Tarhos Kovac, a desperate warrior trying to get the satisfaction he saw in chaos when he was younger. Now what kind of satisfaction is this? You know, the best way that it literally put it as was awe. During his younger years, Tarhos did get his village raided and there was a lot of chaos. Instead of being frightened, however, he seemed to be mesmerized by everything that happened to bring him to a starstruck phase of awe, which kinda explains how he got here in the first place. Tarhos was then taken away to Italy and was now forced to be part of the Guardia Campania, which is where he learned how to fight, forge, and recite a code of chivalry to serve the ones who employed him. He made a couple of friends throughout the years and attracted 3 followers who pledged under Tarhos, later to be known as his Faithful 3. These are actually the guards that he summons in-game. These guards' names are Alejandro Santiago, Dirkos Malisek, and Sander Ralt. I have no idea if I even said those names right. I probably butchered them, but we're gonna keep going. Tarhos never found the feeling he had when he saw his village get destroyed. So when he was granted knighthood and freedom, Tarhos left the Guardia Campania. However, their leader refused to release his followers. In order to free his followers, he took employment for an Italian lord, the Duke of Portoscuro, known as Vittorio Toscano. He joined Vittorio on his last expedition to seek a stone known as the Lapis Paradisus, which is said to open a gateway to a perfect world beyond good and evil. Vittorio did not want violence upon this trip, but Tarhos refused this action as he cut through a village until he found the stone. Once he returned to Portoscuro, Tarhos imprisoned Vittorio and demanded Vittorio to explain the meanings behind the stone, but Vittorio never gave in, even after seeing his friends being tortured by Tarhos. Fueled by rage, Tarhos gathered Vittorio's riches and raised a small army to raid the Guardia Campania to free his followers and finish off the righteous leaders. Quite literally had in his backstory in quotations as righteous. Tarhos was now known as the embodiment of evil, as other lords had their armies on the march to take down Tarhos' army. Tarhos went down to the dungeons to finish off Vittorio so no one could have his knowledge, but all he found was an empty cell with rats. Letting out a roar of distress, Tarhos heard the sound of battle happening, as Portoscuro was now a battlefield. The village was now in a similar state to the one Tarhos was in during his childhood. Eventually, the entity took him, engulfing Tarhos in the black fog, revealing to him a wasteland completely destroyed. Tarhos stood there, as he had finally found what he was looking for, a feeling of awe that showed beauty and horror at the same time. You know, I don't know why someone would be in awe for this, but hey, that's just me. Let's actually not think about that now, because we are going to be going into the stats section. The Knight is considered a medium humanoid with a neutral evil alignment. His armor class is at an 18 with 60 hit points and has a base speed of 30 feet. The Knight had a lot of training under his belt, so we can say that he is specialized in combat. For that, we need strength to be on our side, as the Knight's strength and constitution is his 2 highest stats. Wisdom would be above all the other stats in this case, since you would have to acknowledge your surroundings while fighting. The only stat that suffers a tiny bit is dexterity. And if you ask why, how exactly is he going to be nimble in full plate armor? Plus, when you actually face a knight in Dead by Daylight, you can always hear him stomping around the place. He can be 5 miles away and then you get a 9.2 magnitude of an earthquake, and you can still hear the thunderous boom colliding with the ground wherever he steps. Having high endurance in battles, the knight is proficient in strength and constitution saving throws. Some skills the knight is proficient with is athletics, perception, and survival. Similar to other Dead by Daylight monsters we made on this channel, the knight has a resistance to non-magical attacks that are bludgeoning, slashing, and piercing damage. This monster actually doesn't have any damage immunities, which is actually pretty nice if you're facing the creature. There are conditioned immunities, however, which are blinded, charmed, exhaustion, frightened, prone, and stunned. The knight can understand the common language and one other language of your choice. So the knight can understand like the devil's tongue if you wanted to. It's really up to you, whatever your DM says. I was kind of going back and forth between the CR rating for this monster. It was originally going to be 4, but with the things I'm going to be mentioning next, we boosted him up to a 6. Speaking about things we're talking about next, let's talk about his weapon. In Dead by Daylight, he has a weapon called the Imposing Claymore. Now, in some cultures, claymores actually count as great swords, so we're going to be comparing this to a great sword weapon, with it having a +7 to hit and a range of 5 feet. It will also deal 2d6 +4 slashing damage on a hit. Now, the knight technically has 2 powers in Dead by Daylight. One of them is Guardia Compania, which makes it so he can summon his 3 loyal companions. In Dead by Daylight, you can only summon 1. However, when you encounter the knight, it works a bit different in Dungeons and Dragons. At the start of the encounter, the knight summons his 3 loyal companions, the Carnifex, the Assassin, and the Jailer, which spawns within a 60-foot radius of the knight. It doesn't have to be exactly 60 feet, it just has to be in a certain radius, so the DM can always decide on where to put these companions. Once the knight becomes unconscious or is killed, all the companions fade in a ghostly fog, returning to the underworld. Now, this is the reason why we actually boosted his CR rating, because these 3 companions can act on their own, or they all have their own separate monster sheets. I'm not going to go into all the details, but we'll go over what they are proficient in and what abilities I gave them. Up first is the Carnifex. The Carnifex is proficient in his strength. Along with being as big as the knight and a heavy hitter, I gave the Carnifex the Savage Attacks ability, which when he scores a critical hit on a melee weapon attack, they can add another damage dice to the roll. The Assassin is proficient in his Dexterity. This guard can be compared to a rogue, which is why they have the Sneak Attack ability. This will give them more dice to roll when they hit a creature with advantage. The Jailer is proficient in his Wisdom. Having the longest time for patrol and the largest radius out of the 3, I gave the Jailer 2 abilities, Freedom of Movement, which makes him ignore anything that reduces his speed, and Keen Hearing and Sight, which gives the Jailer advantage on perception checks that rely on hearing or sight. With those 3 out of the way, we're now going to move back to the knight, as we are going to recall his second power, which is known as Guard Summon, which in Dead by Daylight summons one of the 3 guards to follow a path and go on a patrol until they see a survivor. In Dungeons and Dragons, the knight can use an action to summon a fallen companion back from the dead. After that, the knight becomes incapacitated. Now, this next thing I'm going to mention does occur in Dead by Daylight, but it feels right to make this an ability of some sort for the knight. The thing I'm talking about is Guard Order. In Dead by Daylight, this is usually when the guard is summoned in, whether it goes into a chase or if it breaks something. In Dungeons and Dragons, this is actually a bonus action that the knight can take. The knight chooses one of his companions to either make one weapon attack or use his movement without invoking opportunity attacks. That just about covers his power, but what about the perks? I'm pretty sure that some of you are wondering, why is a knight immune to being blind? Well, this is because of one of his perks, which is known as Nowhere to Hide. In Dead by Daylight, when you damage a generator, you'll be able to see the auras of survivors within a certain radius of that kicked gen. In Dungeons and Dragons, this is actually an ability for the knight. This ability makes it so the knight has advantage on perception checks that rely on sight. This also grants the knight to be immune to the blinded condition. I mean, if the ability is literally called Nowhere to Hide, there really isn't going to be anywhere to hide, even when you try to blind him. The knight does have a hex perk, which is known as Face the Darkness. Basically, once you injure a survivor by any means, a random totem will be lit as a hex, which will cause survivors to scream if they are outside of your terror radius, revealing their auras for a short amount of time. In Dungeons and Dragons, this is actually a bonus action that the knight can use. After using the attack action, the knight can choose creatures within 120 feet to make a wisdom saving throw. If they fail, they are frightened for 1 minute. The creature can repeat the saving throw at the end of its turns. If you're a player and you do fail the saving throw, you don't need to worry, because at the end of each of your turn, you can reroll the dice to see if you can get out of being frightened. And if you end up succeeding that saving throw, you'll be immune to this ability for the next 24 hours. Last but not least, we have Hubris. In Dead by Daylight, when you are stunned by a survivor, that survivor suffers from the exposed status effect. The only thing in Dungeons & Dragons that I can compare to the exposed status effect is vulnerability. So this will act as a reaction. Hubris does have a recharge after each use. You can use this reaction when a creature has damaged the knight. When the knight takes damage from a creature, that creature is now vulnerable to the type of damage it dealt to the knight until the end of the knight's next turn. And that just about wraps it up. I can kind of see the knight being used in like sort of like a dungeon, or maybe like a battlefield of some sort, or maybe even like a lair. I'm not really too sure. Just a reminder that this is all homebrew, so feel free to arrange any of the abilities or stats to make this a comfortable encounter for your party. Or if you're like the knight, maybe you want to see some chaos. Screw it, just give the knight a legendary action at this point. Make him just attack every turn or something. I don't know. I'm sure you can come up with something. This is the knight from Dead by Daylight in Dungeons & Dragons. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you all enjoyed this creation. Make sure to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more of this kind of content. Oh, and if you have any ideas on who I should make next, or any changes you would make to the knight, leave a comment down below. With that being said, stay safe, and you have yourself a good one. I'll see you all later.